Welcome to Two Steps Forward. I'm James, this is Aid, and this is where we do our journey through the Bible together, one chapter at a time with some commentary and devotional thoughts. And we're right now in Joshua chapters. Today we're looking at Joshua chapters 3 and 4. In the entirety of Two Steps Forward, we're in episode 356. 356. Today we haven't done this in a while, where we push, I know you love doing it, where we push a couple chapters together, just because I think the flow of them goes together pretty well, and it makes sense for a couple of different reasons. I think we're going to do this a couple times in Joshua's book. Anything before we get started here today?
I have no updates. Did I already say I'm taking golf lessons?
I think you might have mentioned that.
I'm really bad at it. That's the update. I'm really
Golf
terrible.
is a humbling experience.
I thought I was going to cry at one point. I was so frustrated. I think the instructor could tell, and he's like...
That seems unnecessary.
What?
Crying.
He was like, it's tough. It's tough.
It is frustrating, yeah.
No, but he's really good, especially for someone who coaches pros and college and high school golf athletes, just starting over with a beginner. Mm-hmm. He's been really good, so.
Yeah, we're looking for additional things for us to do, especially outside. We don't have a lot of things that we do together outside.
Yeah.
To get outside, so might be trying that. Anyways, Joshua 3 and 4 today. What we're going to do first is just read chapter 3 and then go through a couple devotional thoughts. We'll jump to chapter 4 then and do a final devotional thought. So if you haven't read Joshua 3 yet, please do so now. Here's my summary. The Israelites moved out as Joshua commanded. They were to follow the ark at a distance of 2,000 cubits, which, remember, a cubit is from your elbow to your fingertip, so about 1.5 feet, so about 3,000 feet. Joshua told the people to consecrate themselves because the next day God would use them for something amazing. The priest went ahead of the people with the ark. 3,000 feet, by the way, would be the equivalent of a football field is 100 yards. So that is...
making my brain hurt.
Times 3 is 300 feet. So 3,000 feet would be like 10 football fields.
Oh.
Okay.
That's really far away.
It is a distance, yes. Just visible, probably. God told Joshua that he would be exalted as Moses was, and the priests, so he's reassuring him he'll have the same kind of leadership that Moses has. The priests took the ark and stood in the water of the Jordan River. Joshua was to choose a man from each tribe in Israel, and the priests went ahead with the ark. The water of the Jordan would stand up. Despite being at flood stage, we know from the time of year it was and all that, the water stopped flowing and stood up at a town called Adam. And the priest stood in the middle of the Jordan River on dry ground during flooding season, the harvest season, and all the people crossed over safely. That's Joshua chapter 3.
Did they have to stop in that town because it was like their new beginning?
No. They're not stopping at...
And Adam was the beginning?
It's a creative thought. But no, I don't think that's it. At least I've never made that connection before. I think it's the water stops at Adam.
Okay.
Maybe there is some kind of significance to that I haven't thought through. It's an interesting thought, but it's a number of miles north is where the water is stopping, and then they're able to walk. But they're not at that city.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I have to turn off my space heater.
Okay, yes, thank you for doing that. So the first devotional thought for the day is, number 1, crossing the great river, an act of faith. So most of the year, the Jordan River was about 100 feet wide. Obviously, during flood seasons, it stretches out further, and during the flood season, it could actually get as far as like a mile wide, which seems to be probably about what it is here. The process that is being described is the priests are carrying the Ark of the Covenant, which is mentioned, like them carrying this Ark of the Covenant is mentioned numerous times, going before Israel multiple times in chapters 3 and 4. They walk down into the river, they stand there about 20 miles upstream near that city called Adam. God caused the river to stop flowing. That journey for God's people is therefore a walk of faith. They're risking something by going across. They're taking what God has promised to them, they're acting upon it, and God is working powerfully through his means, through nature and through people, as his mediators. God deserves all the credit for the miracle, but the Israelites nonetheless still have to get up and act in order to benefit from the miracle. And it's worth noting, I think, that in the Heroes of Faith chapter of the Bible, in Hebrews chapter 11, it's not just, faith is never described as a passive activity. It's not just that they possessed faith in God, that he would do good. They always did something. Every hero of faith in Hebrews 11 did something. So in order to have faith must be expressed. It can't be some kind of passive exercise. It always, in other words, leads to action. What is something that you think a lot of Christians know they should be doing because God has told them to do it, and yet the acting part of getting up and doing it is maybe even kind of rare?
I feel like prayer is a big one.
Okay.
I think most Christians think they should pray more.
Yes.
And are maybe only doing like recited prayers.
Yeah.
There are so many things that I should do that I don't do.
Okay.
Just like, mostly, this is a confession, but I was telling James earlier, I'm so selfish with my time. Like, I don't even care about, I'll give you whatever money you need, but like my time, I hoard it. And so just different like things at church, whether it's like a fellowship thing or a program, or I'm like, I should sign up for that, I should, but I don't want to because it would require time.
Yeah.
I actually think you're really good at this because there are so many things you do that I say, why are you doing that? That's not your obligation. You don't have to do that. And you say it's the right thing to do.
Yeah, I feel like I can rationalize doing or not doing almost anything, but at the end of the day, it becomes a conscience choice of what would God have me do here. But your point about time, I think, is really good because it's we always forget that, like, I mean, for a lot of us, money is it's a limited or resource, but it's not there's not a absolute cap on how much money you can have. There is on time. We all only have 24 hours, so giving it away for some of us feels more intense.
So you never really pushed me to do anything, which I appreciate.
I inspire you to do things.
It either means that I've grown in faith and now just do things that I should do, whether it's lead a small group or never miss church or whatever, the basics. Like, there was a time where I felt like you had to tell me to do things.
Yeah.
And you don't, for a long time you haven't, and I appreciate that about you, but I do think I could use like you saying that to me sometimes, like, or just ask me the question, like when I bring something up and I'm like, oh, so and so whatever ask me to do this, just say like, well, do you think it's the right thing to do?
Yeah.
Maybe that'll push me to action more.
Yeah, I think there probably is. I mean, that's part of the ministry skill of things, is encouraging people in the right direction without being condescending or judgmental or moralistic in the process.
And I will say, so there are shoulds when I feel like, yep, there's no reason I shouldn't be doing this. But I think I'm also good at not putting shoulds on myself that are unnecessary. Like, for example, we attended our nephew's confirmation. It was like a Sunday afternoon service, and the pastor doing the confirmation at that church, his wife was there. And I said, why do you think she came to they don't have a kid who's getting confirmed? And you're like, what do you mean? And I said, well, I'm sure she attended morning services. Why is she attending an additional service? And you were like, I don't think you realize, like, just, I don't want to use the word bare minimum because I don't think that's fair, but I don't think you realize, saying to me, I don't think you realize how many things most pastors' wives attend. Yeah. And I think that I'm pretty good at not putting like the shoulds on me in those areas. Yeah. You know, like I should go to an additional service or something. Do you know what I'm saying? There are spiritual things I should be doing, but there are organizational things that I don't feel, I'm not going to put the should on me. Like the pastor's wife should do this.
Yes. You can't allow yourself to be controlled by the sometimes self-righteous rules of, now if you want to go, like having like a mature faith where you're going to extra services. And
see, even there you're saying it's a maturity thing.
It doesn't have to be. If that is something that you desire in your mature Christian faith. Mm-hmm. If in your mature Christian faith you choose to opt out of, like, there are some people, for instance, if we ran 12 Easter services on Sunday.
Yeah.
They would attend all 12 Easter services.
Because they feel like it's an obligation.
For some of them, it might be a spiritual maturity that they just love soaking this in. But there's a portion of them that would be coming out of obligatory conscience, whatever. And at that point, you're allowing the shoulds of like moralistic human behaviorism to control your life. Christians are free. So we're free from especially man-made laws and everything. So
yeah,
I think what you're describing is, yes, it can be. Let's go back to here, acting in faith. The acting of faith is absolutely based on God's promises. If God hasn't attached a promise to a certain behavior, it's not necessarily, it's hard to draw a line that it's acting in faith, always, you know? So I think that's the thing. The thing that jumped out for me was, I think prayer is a good example. I think Christian witnessing is another one of those things that, has God told us to do it? Absolutely. Absolutely. Has he told us to share our faith? Do it. But we don't do it.
He hasn't told me to attend midweek Lenten services. So.
He hasn't, no. Again, multiple services a week or multiple services a day. He says to gather regularly with your body.
But I will just put a disclaimer that I work till 7 p.m. So sometimes evening things are not an option for me. Why are you smiling?
You are absolved of the things that you are not commanded to do in the first place. But that, I think there is a level of... you must act when God has told you this is what you do. Cross the river, you know? Don't be scared. It's like when God told the Israelites to enter the promised land. There's definitely a correlation here to going back to the spies 40 years earlier after they had crossed the Red Sea. They weren't allowed to enter the promised land because God told them, this is what you'll do. I'll be with you. I'll help you defeat the Canaanites. And they said, no, we're not doing it. We're too scared. Because they were basing their actions on circumstances, not on God's promises. Christian faith always acts. Second thing here today, crossing into the promised land is a claiming of our inheritance. So the crossing of the Red Sea is that is for the believer. It is a picture of deliverance from spiritual bondage. So the Israelites were enslaved back in Egypt. So it is in many respects, a spiritual metaphor for how God's people have been released from the slavery of sin. The crossing of the Jordan River has sometimes been depicted as entering into the promised land in the sense of going to heaven. So like in some hymns, it's been written that way, like we're crossing the Jordan River as in like we're dying and going home to heaven. The only problem with interpreting the metaphor that way is that there are still battles that take place in Canaan once the Israelites get there, whereas there are no battles once we get to heaven. So what some commentators have said instead is the Jordan River actually is more of a metaphor of acting on God's promises and claiming our inheritance. There's a peace, there's a prosperity, there's a joy when we actually do what God tells us to do, cross the river, and when we get to claim the things that are our inheritance through God's promises and Christ's sacrifices. So, in other words, crossing the Jordan River, if crossing the Red Sea was an image of being delivered from the bondage of sin, crossing the Jordan River is an image of when you are obedient to God's word, you will claim the inheritance. You will find a joy. You will find a peace that surpasses all understanding in obedience to God's commands. Okay? Is there an area of your life that you found, you think, some level of peace, some level of comfort by obeying God's word, that maybe before you resisted it, but you came to find, like, when I actually do what God tells me to do here, there's a peace in my life because of that?
I think I read the question differently. Because I feel like I did go into being a pastor's wife, like kicking and screaming, and definitely didn't want what I perceived that role to be. But you're asking, is there something God actually tells me to do that I'm...
Yeah, I'm saying maybe there was something that you didn't do in the past. Like, so I'll give an example for myself.
Okay.
When I've talked about this before, when we were dating, did I give an offering? Yes, I gave an offering. It wasn't a very generous offering. It was my leftovers. It was whatever I had in my wallet. It was whatever. Because I was really concerned about money all the time, and I was not giving my first fruit offering. Upon some encouragement and some reflection and prayer, I went into the realm of like, yep, I'm convicted. I should be tithing. I should be giving my first fruit offering to the Lord. Since then, I have really not had much financial concern in my life. And I don't think that's just a product of circumstances. I think it's because I was acting in faith on what I believed God promised to be true. I was submitting my financial peace and health to Him more than I was before. And it gave me a level of calm. And I realized, yes, when I actually obey the way God tells me to, it gives me some peace and calm in my life.
And I think I've heard my mom say the same thing about like when her and my dad were married and they were 20 years old and then I was born, they had no money. She's still would tithe, and she will speak to that being like the reason that they had the great jobs they had and that all those things came.
Yeah. So I guess that's the kind of thing that's one example. I think for some people it could be like, okay, I know I should pray more, but when I actually start praying, I find peace in it. I remember my devotional life. There was a time, probably around 22, 23, 24, where I actually started reading my Bible not to take a test, not to get a grade. And I found that I had some additional levels of calm and peace in my life because I was actually doing what I knew God wanted me to do.
Yeah.
That's kind of what I'm after here. Okay, so let's take a look now at Joshua chapter 4. So if you haven't read it, please pause and read through that right now. But here's my personal summary for the crossing of the Jordan account in Joshua 4. When the Israelites finished crossing the Jordan, God had them set up 12 large stones. Joshua called the leaders from the 12 tribes together and told them that they were to instruct the people what these stones meant, that God had helped them cross the Jordan. So the leaders of Israel set up 12 stones from the middle of the Jordan River at the edge where the priests crossed with the Ark of the Covenant. The Israelites then crossed over, led by 40,000 armed men, these kind of special forces that were ready for battle. God exalted Joshua among the Israelites, and they were all in awe, just as they had been with Moses. God had Joshua call the priests to cross over, and when the priests finally crossed over, then the floodwaters came flowing down the river again. The 12 stones were set up, also we're told, at Gilgal, and God again told them that they were to remind their people of God's powerful hand in helping them cross the river.
I heard it said that the reason God did this specific miracle is because these Israelites, none of them would have crossed the Red Sea. Like, none of them were present for that. So much time has passed that he's just saying, like, nope, I'm still the same God, and you're still my people.
Yeah, it wasn't that none of them had, because Joshua, for instance, was one that had been involved in crossing the Red Sea, but most of them had not. Most of them had not witnessed, and so it's a reiteration to a next generation of that same kind of power. So there are definite similarities. Although there are some differences here too. With the first one, Moses raises his hands and the Israelites cross over. Here specifically, it's the Ark of the Covenant. The priests wade into the waters, and when they do, the waters start to dam up way farther north. And so there's a slight difference in all of that happening. Even I won't get into more of those differences because I want to get to the third devotional thought, is just the good and bad of memorials. So it is interesting here that God has them set up 12 stones, one from each tribe, as indicative of what has taken place here. And he's very clearly suggesting a memorial is something where you are reminded of something very important. We don't know for sure. This is a little bit confusing. We don't know for sure if there are two sets of 12 stones set up or one set of 12 stones, because it sounds, with the way you read the text, it can be read either as you're to set up the stones at the Jordan River or set up stones from the Jordan River. And we know that God tells them to set up stones in Gilgal, but is it Gilgal plus right at the bank of the river? We don't know that quite for sure, but we know whether it's one or two sets of 12 stones. What we do know, it's probably two, but what we do know is the purpose for setting up these stones is twofold. One, it's so that the Israelites, when their kids start growing up and they see this monument, they will ask them, what is this all about? And it is a natural occasion where the Israelites have to tell their kids what the purpose about God bringing us through the Jordan and into the promised land. And here's why he did that. It's also a reminder of why they should fear the Lord, because if he has the power to dam up the Jordan River and the power to dam up the Red Sea, if he has that kind of control over things, this is a God that is not to be like trifled with. This is a God who controls the forces of nature, and they're dependent on him. So for the fear of the Lord and for the instruction of the next generation, these 12 stones get set up as a monument. Interestingly, if you continue to read through the story of the Israelites, what we find is the Israelites always do this. Within a couple generations, they start turning things just into shrines, not memorials. And so, for instance, the prophet Hosea and the prophet Amos both criticized them for worshiping at Gilgal, where the monument is, instead of in Jerusalem, where God was now telling them to go. They have a tendency, the Israelites always have this tendency to take helpful religious reminders. So remember, they were to learn the fear of the Lord, and they were to instruct the next generation based on this monument. But humans have a tendency to take religious reminders, objects, traditions, and rites, and turn them into idols as a substitute for a living relationship with a living God. Okay? Do you have a question here?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So, in the Ark of the Covenant held the presence of God?
God, yes, it's the local presence of God.
So, is the Holy Spirit in there?
So you're trying to split hairs that the Bible doesn't tell us on. God is one, and so when he goes to the temple,
in the chest?
When he goes to the temple, when he goes to the tabernacle, we see a visible manifestation of him being there, and its presence. Where is what is put in the temple? The Ark of the Covenant. Yes, so that is symbolizing the presence of God in their lives. Okay. My question then for this one is, do you have any sort of spiritual memorial or tradition that you set up or that you regularly see or that you regularly pass by that is a helpful reminder of God's power and your witness of his grace?
Well, I have Psalm 103 verses 8 and 10 in Greek on my shoulder, but I actually don't ever really see it.
Okay.
But no, so I don't remember growing up having like anything in our house, whether it's a cross or a sign or anything like that. But my grandparents had a huge statue of the Virgin Mary in their flower bed.
They were Roman Catholic.
And then they had obviously like their rosaries. And I don't know what to say about a rosary. Like, I actually kind of think it makes sense to say, like, have some kind of incentive. Like, I have to get through these many beads. Something attached to prayer to encourage you to do it. But I also don't really know a lot about a rosary, if there was, like, more to it than that.
So what Roman Catholics and Eastern Orthodox are very strong proponents of, even if I don't 100% agree with the theology of it, they have a liturgical mindset that says that your beliefs are not merely passive thoughts in your head, but you are shaped by the actions and the rituals that you perform in life. And therefore, all of the shapes, all the actions, all the drama renewal ceremonies that you go through in those churches are designed to shape your heart to remember who you are, who God is, and your relationship to God.
Well, like, this is a good example. My mom really likes bracelets, and when I went to the Basilica, the big one here in Holy Hill, I got her a bracelet from there because, well, she grew up her whole life Catholic. And I thought that she would, it did have a little Virgin Mary on it, but I was comfortable with that because I know that she is not making an idol of the Virgin Mary. It would just be a reminder of like her faith and a reminder of God.
Yeah. So there's always a danger attached to things like there were times too when God didn't allow, so you shall not make a graven image of God is a fascinating instruction that God gives the Israelites because he understands their human default tendency to turn something, a shrine into God as a substitute for genuine relationship with God. So are traditions good or bad? The answer is yes, both. If they are used the correct way, they are really helpful reminders that root you to where you've come from and where you're going and what your relationship with God is currently. If the heart gets corrupted and false, and they can become simple exercises that you go through. It's the exact same concept. Even when we say the Lord's Prayer, I mean, a lot of people I don't think understand this. The Lord's Prayer, which a lot of the people who are studying with us have said thousands of times. And yet of those thousands of times that you have said it, how many times have you been consciously in a heartfelt way working through those words or just repetitiously rattling them off, right? And so when you're repetitiously rattling off the words, then it's functioning like a tradition in an unhealthy kind of way. In fact, when Jesus taught the Lord's Prayer, a lot of commentators believe he wasn't actually teaching a prayer to say. He was teaching us how, he says, this then is how you should pray, meaning he's teaching a template for how to pray. And so that's right there to me is the distinction. It's not wrong to say the Lord's Prayer, of course. It is wrong to simply go through the motions of it. And shrines, rituals, traditions, memorials, if you turn them into, if they're helpful in fostering a relationship with God, they're a good thing. If they become the God that you like this, if they hinder relationship with God, then they're a bad thing.
I do really like the idea. I think it's cool to frame your baptismal certificate. Like, I would rather have that on my wall than my doctorate degree, which I have on my wall.
Yeah, yes. Baptism reminders are like identity reminders, because I can't think of a functional reason for a diploma, really. You know, like, especially in your own office. It's not like you have like visitors, like, are you trying to remind me regularly
Yes.
that, you know, it just doesn't serve any, except for a reminder of identity. And if you're a Christian, then your primary reminder of identity that you want would be, I'm a redeemed child of God. So,
But I spent so much on those frames from the colleges.
yeah, that's true.
It'd be a real waste.
All right, shall we close the prayer? Father, thanks for our time in your word here today. As we watch you make promises to the Israelites, keep promises to the Israelites, and for that matter, we learn something from the Israelites when they get up and act. They're willing to cross a river at danger to themselves, despite that they're what their flesh wants or what their flesh fears. They're willing to do what you tell them to do. Help us to do the same, whether that is witnessing in our life or prayer in our life or offerings in our life or whatever it is. Help us to have some sort of helpful reminders and memorials that teach us how good you are to us and that we should act in faith on your good words moving forward. May it glorify your name. Amen. Thanks for studying with us today. We'll see you next time for Joshua chapter 5.